Back in 2004, Kevin Garnett won the NBA's MVP award. It was almost unanimous, with him getting 120 out of 123 possible votes. On the season, he averaged 24.2 points a night, 13.9 boards, 5 assists, 1.5 steals, and 2.2 blocks a night. It was an impressive season all around, as he led the Timberwolves all the way to the Western Conference Finals. This was, up until recently, in some people's eyes, still is the best season that the Timberwolves have ever had. And it was courtesy of Kevin Garnett, who, in an era where he played alongside Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki, he somehow still found a way to set himself apart, at least for this season. He defined Minnesota basketball, and he went on to do it with jerseys that have become iconic, especially the black ones. The Timberwolves alternate jerseys were jerseys that were so perfectly able to encapsulate what it meant to be a Minnesota Timberwolf. They had an uber unique font to them that the Wolves used, and you can't forget about that trim with the trees. It was something special, and you cannot talk about the iconic 2004 or just overall the iconic Kevin Garnett era in Minnesota without talking about those jerseys. But then they went away. These jerseys would finally make their return in the 2018-19 season. This was a year after the Timberwolves had just ended a lengthy playoff drought, and so in turn, at the time, it felt right to bring them back. It was a nod to their success from the KG era of the past, and to look at their current success, led by guys like Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns. But this success was ultimately fleeting, as they would not make the playoffs back-to-back years. And so while these jerseys still looked great, they didn't have that same impact. They didn't have that same level of success that they did back when Garnett was wearing them. However, there was one special night. On Halloween night of 2018, there was nothing scarier than having to guard Derrick Rose. He went off for a career high 50 points. He was at this point far, far removed from being MVP level Derrick Rose. At this point, he was fighting for a spot in the league. But he had an opportunity on that night, and he gave everything he had in those black jerseys with a classic tree trim, and he recorded 50 points. In the post-game interview, Rose was emotional, and it was an incredible night for him. His career high did not come during his prime. It came years later with these iconic jerseys. And so, even though the season had not been a success, this moment was a massive highlight for both Derrick Rose and the Minnesota Timberwolves as a whole. He had been beaten down by injuries. The entire world had looked at him and said that he didn't quite have what it took to be an NBA player anymore. But Derrick Rose had other ideas. He still had something special inside of him. And this moment really allowed him to extend his career. Because during his tenure in Minnesota, he was on the outskirts. He was about to be on the outside of the league looking in. But after this, he found more opportunity, moving on to the Pistons and time with the Knicks. In this moment, in the black jerseys with the classic trim, it really signified it all and marked that turning point. A few years after that, it didn't take long for the Timberwolves to establish a new core, that being D'Angelo Russell, Karl-Anthony Towns, and the newly drafted Anthony Edwards. At the time, this foundational unit seemed like it had quite a bit of potential. Karl-Anthony Towns at this point was an established all-star, established face of the franchise for the time. Anthony Edwards, as of course the number one overall draft pick, had a sky-high ceiling. And for D'Angelo Russell, he was not far removed from his first all-star tenure over in Brooklyn. And coming to the Timberwolves, actually, he had gotten traded mid-season. And that first half of the season with Golden State, that was, in my opinion, the best D'Angelo Russell we've ever seen. Even better than Brooklyn when you look at the numbers. He didn't have the same winning impact, but D'Lo, his stock was still high at the time. And this looks like an exciting big three. But these jerseys, after what happened last time, yes, you had the great Derrick Rose moment, but overall the season wasn't much of a success. So they decided not to bring him back. The score was promising, but it wasn't quite the right time. Eventually, after a few years of solid but inconsistent play, especially when it came playoff time, the Timberwolves would trade D'Angelo Russell. And this meant that the backcourt was firmly in the hands of Anthony Edwards. Because in place of D'Lo was Mike Conley. Now, Mike Conley is, of course, an all-star, one of the most respected veterans in the league. But his style of play is very, very different from D'Angelo Russell. You see, where D'Lo was quite ball dominant, Mike Conley's the opposite of that. And this was somebody who was going to allow Ant to take on the ball handling duties, and Conley was going to play more of a supportive role. The backcourt was Anthony Edwards, and this was going to allow him to develop to an even greater extent and become more of the star that we would see today. A few years after that, in a shocking blockbuster move, Karl-Anthony Towns was traded away from the Minnesota Timberwolves. And this was a move that ultimately felt like it was mainly done for financial reasons, but it was absolutely shocking nonetheless. And what it did mean, though, was that this was firmly Anthony Edwards' team. You see, in the past, you had D'Lo. He's gone now. It's Ant's backcourt. But you still had Cat. And so you had two guys as face of the franchise. One came in there 5 years earlier. So the timelines, they still matched up, but not perfectly. But now the Timberwolves, they were living firmly in the timeline of Anthony Edwards once they traded Cat. This was his team. Led by Anthony Edwards, the Timberwolves would make the Western Conference Finals for the second straight year, this time without Karl-Anthony Towns. And whilst they would ultimately lose to the Thunder in 5, it was a playoff run full of memorable moments, and it really felt like Minnesota basketball was back. They had not been on the map much since the Kevin Garnett era, but now things are looking better than ever for the Timberwolves. It all started with that big three, if you can call it that, of Ant, Cat, and D'Lo. Then D'Lo was gone, as they prioritized Ant's development. You bring in Gobert as well, and you make the Western Conference Finals. And then you decide to move on from Cat in a shocking move, but in spite of that, you still go on to make the Conference Finals for the second straight year. There is consistency in this team in spite of roster changes. And that's a sign of good coaching. That is a sign of players that are driven to do whatever they need to do to win. And now those classic black jerseys with the tree trim, they are back once again. And whilst it may have been premature originally when they brought him back after making the playoffs for just 1 year, now things are on the up in Minnesota. Their future has never looked brighter. Their present has hardly ever looked brighter. And so in bringing back these jerseys now, they are honoring the past because of their current success. They are honoring the past because of how great that KG era was, of how prestigious those jerseys were because of the success that they had. They're honoring that now because the Timberwolves are great once again. And so now there's no better time than now to bring back these jerseys. And of course they look beautiful, but the Timberwolves have a lot of things going for them right now, and things are on the up for Minnesota basketball. So it's only right that they would bring back some of the best jerseys that they've ever had. There's a certain level of success you have to bring these jerseys back, because that's the only way that you can honor the KG era. And that's precisely what they're doing. They've got Anthony Edwards, they have Jay McDaniels, Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert. Mike Conley's still there as that veteran presence. They've got young guys like Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. with some potential to them. There's a lot to like about this team, and they've got the accolades to show for it. 2 straight Western Conference Finals appearances. Anthony Edwards is a bona fide superstar. Naz Reid is a 6th man of the year. Rudy Gobert, of course, one of the most highly achieved defensive players we've seen in recent memory. The Timberwolves are back, and what better way to show that than by bringing back these classic jerseys?